High in the Andes mountains of Peru, where clouds cling to ancient stone and the roar of the Urubamba River echoes through impossible gorges, there exists a city that seems to defy logic itself. Machu Picchu rises from a narrow ridge between two peaks, suspended between earth and sky, integrated so seamlessly with its mountain landscape that the boundary between nature and human achievement becomes indistinguishable. For centuries beyond the immediate region, virtually no one spoke of it. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the heart of the Inca Empire in the 16th century, they destroyed temples, sacked cities, and wrote detailed chronicles of everything they encountered. Yet in all those pages, Machu Picchu barely appears. This silence, still puzzling to researchers today, remains one of the great mysteries of Andean history. We now know that Machu Picchu was constructed during the reign of Pachacútec, the visionary leader who transformed the Inca Confederation into a vast empire. Archaeological evidence dates its construction to the mid-15th century, approximately 1450 CE. Though often described as a lost city, it was in reality something quite different: a carefully planned ceremonial center and royal estate, hidden not by accident, but perhaps by design. When the Inca Empire fell to Spanish conquest, Machu Picchu fell silent. Vegetation gradually covered its terraces and temples, concealing it completely within the mountain wilderness. Some structures remained remarkably preserved, protected by their remote location and the dry season climate. Others deteriorated slowly under centuries of rain and encroaching forest. Much later, a foreign explorer guided by local inhabitants rediscovered the site and revealed it to the world outside Peru. It was as though the landscape itself had protected the city for centuries, waiting for the right moment to reveal its existence. The story of Machu Picchu begins not with its fame, but with its silence, because therein lies its fascination. A city without clear mentions in colonial chronicles, without its own writing system, whose very presence forced scholars to reconsider what they thought they knew about pre-Columbian civilizations. This is the story of that mystery. Not simply how Machu Picchu was built, though we will examine its extraordinary engineering. Not merely who built it, though we will explore the empire and the emperor responsible for its creation, but rather how this extraordinary achievement managed to remain hidden from the wider world for nearly 400 years, and what its existence tells us about a civilization capable of creating enduring beauty in one of Earth's most challenging environments. To understand Machu Picchu, one must first understand the landscape that shaped it. The site is located in the eastern Cordillera of the Andes, within the Vilcabamba mountain range, where peaks give way to deep valleys and rivers carve through ancient rock with tremendous force. At approximately 2,430 meters above sea level, the city occupies a narrow ridge between two prominent peaks. The peak directly behind the ruins is Huayna Picchu, meaning young peak in Quechua. It rises like a green needle, dramatic and precipitous, its slopes so steep that the trail to its summit includes sections where hikers must use fixed cables. Facing it across the site is Machu Picchu mountain itself, Old Peak, broader and more imposing. Between these two guardians, the ancient city spreads across the ridge. Below, the Urubamba River describes an almost perfect loop, embracing the mountain in a horseshoe bend. The river's course through this region is violent and impressive. During the rainy season, from November through March, it swells with runoff from glaciers and high-altitude precipitation, becoming a chocolate-colored torrent that thunders through the gorge. During the dry season, it runs clear and green, still powerful but more approachable. The location, is as spectacular as it is improbable. Building a city here seemed impossible by any rational assessment. The terrain is dramatically steep. Landslides are common. The annual rainfall exceeds 1,900 millimeters, with the rainy season bringing daily deluges that could quickly erode exposed soil. Seismic activity is frequent. This region sits near the boundary where the Nazca tectonic plate subducts beneath the South American plate, generating earthquakes. Yet the Incas not only built here, but created structures that have survived more than 5 centuries. The terraces extend like stone staircases, transforming impossibly steep slopes into usable agricultural space, while simultaneously preventing erosion. Water from springs high on the mountain is channeled through carefully engineered stone conduits, distributed to fountains and agricultural areas, then directed away from structures to prevent water damage. The buildings themselves adapt to the terrain as though they grew from the living rock. Walls follow the contours of the mountain. Foundations are built directly onto bedrock wherever possible. The stones fit together with such precision that even today, more than 500 years later, and after countless earthquakes, many walls show no sign of mortar and maintain their structural integrity. The Incas achieved this without iron tools, without wheels for transport, and with llamas that could carry loads of only about 25 to 30 kilograms. Some stones were quarried and carved on site, shaped from the white granite that forms the mountain itself. Others were brought from quarries located across the Urubamba River, requiring transport across the raging water and up near vertical slopes. When compared with other ancient wonders, the pyramids of Egypt, Petra in Jordan, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, Machu Picchu stands out for a specific reason. All these sites represent extraordinary human achievement, combining engineering, artistry, and spiritual vision. But Machu Picchu emerged not from desert or plain, but from cloud forest and mountain, in one of Earth's most geologically active and meteorologically challenging environments. Nothing about the site appears accidental or haphazard. Every element reflects harmony between stone, sun, and mountain. Viewed from a distance, the city merges with its landscape, barely distinguishable from the natural terrain. Viewed close, it appears as though the mountain itself created these structures, so seamlessly are they integrated with the bedrock. This integration reflects a fundamental aspect of Andean cosmovision. The Incas did not see themselves as separate from nature, conquering or dominating the landscape. Rather, they understood their civilization as part of a larger sacred order, in dialogue with powerful natural forces. Mountains were not obstacles to overcome, but deities to honor. Water was not simply a resource to exploit, but a sacred element connecting sky, earth, and underworld. The choice of this specific location, despite its challenges, was therefore not merely practical, but deeply spiritual. The site sits at the intersection of multiple sacred geographies. The Urubamba River, called Wilcamayu in Quechua, meaning sacred river, was itself a deity. The surrounding peaks, including Salcante and Veronica, were powerful apus, mountain spirits that protected and shaped the Andean world. The elevation itself was significant. At 2,430 meters, Machu Picchu occupies a transition zone between the high Puna grasslands above and the cloud forest below. This ecological position between worlds mirrored its spiritual role as a liminal space, a threshold between human and divine realms. The visibility of the site was also carefully considered. From the Urubamba Valley floor, Machu Picchu is essentially invisible, hidden by the ridge's profile. Only from very specific vantage points can glimpses of structures be seen. This concealment was likely deliberate, protecting the sacred space from casual observation while maintaining its connection to the sacred peaks visible from within the site itself. The microclimate deserves attention as well. The site's elevation and position relative to the river create distinctive weather patterns. Morning fog frequently fills the valley, surrounding the city in clouds that gradually dissipate as the sun rises. This daily emergence from mist reinforced the site's otherworldly character, as though it existed in a realm between earthly and celestial. The biodiversity of the region is extraordinary. The transition from high Andes to Amazon basin creates an ecological gradient supporting thousands of species. The Incas would have encountered spectacled bears, pumas, deer, and numerous bird species, including the Andean cock of the rock, considered sacred. The forest provided timber, medicinal plants, and materials for rope and thatch. This rich environment made Machu Picchu viable as a permanent settlement, despite its isolation. The terraces could produce maize, potatoes, quinoa, and other crops. The river provided water and fish. The forest supplied game and gathered foods. Combined with supplies brought up the Inca road system, the site could sustain a permanent population of perhaps 500 to 750 people, with capacity to accommodate more during ceremonial occasions. To understand how and why it was built, we must understand the civilization that created it. The Tahuantinsuyo, meaning the four parts together, was the largest empire in pre-Columbian America. At its height in the early 16th century, it stretched from the southern border of modern Colombia through Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia into northern Chile and northwestern Argentina, covering more than 2 million square kilometers. The empire's extent was not merely geographical, but cultural and administrative. More than 12 million people lived under Inca rule, speaking dozens of languages, maintaining diverse traditions, yet bound together by an administrative system of remarkable sophistication. The fact that this vast domain was created, organized, and governed in less than a century, from approximately 1438 to 1532, represents one of history's most impressive imperial achievements. At the apex of this system stood the Sapa Inca, the sole Inca, considered the direct descendant and earthly embodiment of Inti, the sun god. The Sapa Inca was not merely a political leader, but a divine figure whose person was sacred. He wore clothing woven from the finest vicuña wool, ate from gold and silver vessels, and was carried on a golden litter. When he traveled, thousands accompanied him. When he died, his body was mummified and maintained in the Coricancha temple in Cusco, where he continued to own his properties and participate in state ceremonies. The empire was divided into 4 suyos, or quarters, which met at Cusco. Chinchay Suyo extended northwest toward Ecuador and Colombia. Antisuyo reached east into the Amazon basin. Culasuyo stretched south into Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. Kuntisuyo faced west toward the Pacific coast. This quartering reflected Andean concepts of complementary opposition and reciprocal relationships that structured their understanding of the cosmos. Cusco itself embodied this cosmic order. Its name derives from Cusc or Cosco, meaning navel or center in Quechua, reflecting its position as the empire's physical and spiritual axis mundi. The city was laid out in the shape of a puma, one of the 3 sacred animals representing the Kai Pacha, the earthly realm. Major streets radiated outward in straight lines called sikis, invisible pathways connecting the city center to sacred sites throughout the empire. These sikis were more than conceptual. They were actual administrative divisions, with each line assigned to specific noble families responsible for maintaining the huacas, sacred sites, along that line. The system integrated religious practice, social organization, astronomical observation, and land management into a unified framework. Some scholars estimate there were 328 huacas, organized along 41 siquis radiating from the Coricancha, creating a vast sacred landscape centered on Cusco. The Chapacñán, the great Inca road system, physically connected this empire. More than 40,000 kilometers of roads crossed deserts, climbed mountain passes over 5,000 meters high, penetrated jungles, and spanned rivers on suspension bridges woven from grass rope. These roads were not merely trails, but engineered highways, paved with stone, equipped with drainage systems, and punctuated by tambos, way stations providing shelter and supplies for travelers. The road system served multiple functions simultaneously. It facilitated military movement, allowing armies to deploy rapidly to threatened frontiers. It enabled administration, with messages carried by relay runners called chasqui, who could cover up to 240 kilometers per day. It supported trade, though the Inca economy was not based on market exchange. And it expressed imperial power, a physical manifestation of Inca control extending across impossible terrain. That economy operated without money or markets in the European sense. Instead, it was based on principles of reciprocity and redistribution organized through the mitar system. Mitar, meaning turn or season, was a labor tax obligating every able-bodied citizen to work for the state for a portion of each year. This labor built roads, temples, agricultural terraces, and other public works. It staffed state farms and workshops. It even provided soldiers for military campaigns. In return, the state guaranteed food security through massive storage systems. Every major administrative center included kulkua, storage buildings holding preserved foods sufficient to feed the population for years in case of crop failure. Spanish chroniclers like Bernabé Cobo expressed amazement at the scale and organization of these storage facilities, which ensured that famines, common in Europe, were virtually unknown in the Inca Empire. This system reflected a fundamentally different understanding of wealth and value than prevailed in Europe. Wealth was not measured in accumulated gold or silver, but in the ability to mobilize labor and redistribute resources. The most valuable commodities were not precious metals, but fine textiles woven from alpaca and vicuña wool, which took enormous skilled labor to produce and served as markers of status and diplomatic gifts, cementing alliances. The integration of this vast empire was not achieved through cultural homogenization. The Incas practiced what might be called strategic tolerance, allowing subject peoples to maintain their languages, deities, and local customs as long as they accepted Inca overlordship, provided mitar labor, and acknowledged Inti's supremacy. Local elites who cooperated were incorporated into the Inca administrative system, their children educated in Cusco and married into Inca nobility. Rebellious populations faced different treatment. The Incas practiced mitamai, forcibly relocating entire populations from their home regions to distant areas where they would be surrounded by loyal populations and unable to organize resistance. Conversely, loyal populations were sometimes settled in newly conquered territories to serve as colonists, stabilizing Inca control. Religious practices centered on reciprocal relationships with the natural and supernatural worlds. The Incas worshipped a diverse pantheon, including Inti the sun, Mamaquilla the moon, Ilapa the thunder god, Pachamama the earth mother, and many others. These deities were not abstract forces, but active presences requiring regular offerings and ceremonies to maintain cosmic balance. Human sacrifice, though practiced, was relatively rare and reserved for extraordinary occasions. More common were offerings of chicha, maize beer, coca leaves, guinea pigs, llamas, and fine textiles. The most sacred offering was the Pachacútec ceremony, in which children, usually from noble families, were taken to mountaintop shrines, given chicha mixed with psychoactive substances, and left to die of exposure. These children became intermediaries between human and divine worlds, their spirits believed to protect their home communities. This was the civilization into which Machu Picchu was born, a vast empire organized through principles of reciprocity and cosmic order, capable of mobilizing enormous resources for public works, deeply connected to a landscape they viewed as sacred and alive. Understanding this context is essential for understanding why the Incas would devote such extraordinary effort to building a royal estate in such a remote and challenging location. The man responsible for both the empire's greatest expansion and Machu Picchu's construction was born with the name Cusi Yupanqui, meaning joyful accountant. He would become known to history as Pachacútec, Earthshaker, or he who transforms the world, and he would indeed transform the Inca state from a regional power into an empire dominating the Andes. The events that brought Pachacútec to power began in 1438. The Chanca Confederation, a powerful group from the Andahuaylas region northwest of Cusco, launched an invasion aimed at conquering the Inca capital. The Chancas were formidable warriors, and their advance seemed unstoppable. Outlying Inca settlements fell one after another. In the face of this crisis, the reigning Sapa Inca, Viracocha Inca, chose to flee rather than defend Cusco. He retreated to a stronghold in the Sacred Valley, effectively abandoning his capital. This act was not merely cowardice, but potentially strategic. Inca succession was not strictly hereditary, and several of Viracocha's sons could potentially claim power. By fleeing, Viracocha perhaps intended to let his sons prove themselves in battle, with the victor earning the title of Sapa Inca. Cusi Yupanqui, one of Viracocha's younger sons and not the designated heir, refused to abandon Cusco. He rallied the warriors who remained, fortified the city, and prepared to face the Chanca assault. According to later Inca oral traditions recorded by Spanish chroniclers, the battle was desperate. At a crucial moment when defeat seemed certain, Cusi Yupanqui called upon the Apus, the mountain spirits, for aid. The stones of the battlefield rose up as warriors, Pururacas, and joined the fight, turning the tide. This mythological account almost certainly embellishes a real victory, achieved through Cusi Yupanqui's military skill and the determined resistance of Cusco's defenders. The Chancas were defeated, their confederation broken, and Cusco saved. Cusi Yupanqui's prestige soared. He claimed the title of Sapa Inca, taking the name Pachacútec to mark this transformation, effectively deposing his father and sidelining his elder brother, the designated heir. Pachacútec's reign, which lasted from 1438 until his death around 1471, marked the Inca Empire's transformation from regional kingdom to dominant power. He reorganized the state's administrative structure, creating the system of 4 suyos. He reformed religious practices, elevating Inti worship to primacy while incorporating regional deities into the imperial pantheon. He restructured land ownership and labor obligations, systematizing the mit'a. Most visibly, Pachacútec was a builder on an unprecedented scale. He reconstructed Cusco itself, transforming it from a modest settlement into an imperial capital worthy of the expanding empire. The Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun, was rebuilt with walls covered in hammered gold sheets that reflected sunlight with such brilliance that observers reported difficulty looking directly at them. The temple's interior housed mummified bodies of previous Sapa Incas, a golden garden with golden cornstalks and golden llamas, and the most sacred objects of Inca religion. Pachacútec understood that power required not just military might, but symbolic expression through architecture and ceremonial display. Buildings were not merely functional, but conveyed messages about hierarchy, cosmic order, and imperial authority. The finest stonework, with blocks carved and fitted with extraordinary precision, was reserved for the most important structures, creating a visual language of power that impressed both Inca subjects and foreign visitors. The emperor personally oversaw construction projects, reportedly sometimes working alongside laborers to set an example. He traveled extensively throughout the empire, both to lead military campaigns and to inspect public works. Spanish chronicles record that he was a charismatic leader, an inspiring military commander, a skilled diplomat, and a visionary planner. It was Pachacútec who conceived of Machu Picchu. The site was not built as a fortress. Defensive works are minimal, nor was it a permanent imperial capital. Cusco held that role unchallenged. Instead, Machu Picchu appears to have been a royal estate, a sacred space where the emperor could retreat from the demands of governance, perform ceremonies in the presence of the most sacred peaks, and demonstrate the empire's power to shape even the most challenging landscapes. The construction would have required thousands of laborers over several years. Mita obligations pulled workers from throughout the empire to contribute to this monumental project. Specialized stonemasons, chosen for their skill, would have done the finest work. Engineers planned water systems and agricultural terraces. Priests advised on astronomical alignments and ceremonial requirements. The project's location was itself a statement. By building in such an impossibly difficult location and creating such refined architecture there, Pachacútec demonstrated that Inca power could transform any landscape, no matter how challenging. The city was a message carved in stone. We are masters of the Andes, capable of creating beauty and order anywhere the sun's rays touch. Pachacútec ruled for approximately 33 years. When he died around 1471, his mummy was installed in the Coricancha alongside his ancestors. His son, Tupac Inca Yupanqui, continued the empire's expansion, extending Inca control to its furthest extent. But it was Pachacútec who gave the empire its character, its administrative structure, and its most enduring monuments, of which Machu Picchu is perhaps the supreme achievement. The construction of Machu Picchu represents one of history's most impressive engineering achievements. Building a city on a knife-edge ridge at 2,430 meters elevation, in a region receiving nearly 2 meters of rain annually and subject to frequent earthquakes, required solving problems that would challenge modern engineers with contemporary technology. The first challenge was the site itself. The ridge slopes steeply on all sides. Without massive terracing, constructing buildings would be impossible. Structures would simply slide down the mountain. The Incas created more than 700 terraces extending down from the city center, each supported by retaining walls that prevent erosion while creating level planting surfaces. These terraces are not simply piled earth. Each is a sophisticated stratified system. The lowest layer consists of large rocks, providing drainage and structural stability. Above this is a layer of smaller stones and gravel. The top layer is fertile soil suitable for agriculture. This design allows water to drain through the terrace without destabilizing it, while maintaining agricultural productivity. The terrace walls themselves demonstrate remarkable engineering. They lean slightly inward toward the slope rather than standing vertical. This angle, typically about 5 to 10 degrees, helps them resist the outward pressure of earth and water behind them. The walls are wider at the base than at the top, providing additional stability, and they incorporate drainage channels at regular intervals, allowing water to escape rather than building up pressure that could cause collapse. Modern analysis shows that the terraces modify the microclimate, extending the growing season and protecting crops from temperature extremes. The stone walls absorb heat during the day and release it at night, reducing frost damage. The terracing creates multiple growing zones at different elevations, allowing cultivation of diverse crops suited to slightly different conditions. Beyond the terraces, the site required extensive water management. The Incas identified a spring approximately 850 meters from the main plaza and at a slightly higher elevation. They constructed a stone channel, approximately 750 meters long, to bring water from this spring to the city. This channel maintains a precise gradient, just enough to keep water flowing, but not so steep as to cause erosion or excessive speed. Within the city, the water feeds a series of 16 fountains, each carved from a single block of stone. These fountains step down the site, with water flowing from one to the next, providing fresh water throughout the residential areas. The primary temple area, including the Intihuatana, receives water from the first fountain, reflecting the religious importance of water as a sacred element. But managing water was not only about supply. In a site receiving nearly 2,000 millimeters of rainfall annually, drainage was equally critical. Every plaza, terrace, and structure incorporates drainage features. The plazas are slightly convex, shedding water to their edges, where drain channels catch and direct it away from structures. Building floors slope subtly toward drainage channels. Walls include weep holes, allowing water to escape rather than building up pressure. Beneath the visible city lies an invisible infrastructure of drainage channels and foundations. An estimated 60% of the construction effort went into creating these subsurface systems. Modern excavations have revealed that what appears to be solid ground is actually a vast drainage system, with channels directing water away from structures and foundations penetrating through fill to reach bedrock. This investment in invisible infrastructure explains Machu Picchu's survival. Despite centuries of abandonment during which maintenance ceased, despite annual monsoons saturating the site, and despite numerous earthquakes, the structures remain largely intact because water never had the opportunity to destabilize foundations or erode fill. The stonework itself represents extraordinary craftsmanship. The finest walls, particularly around temples and royal residences, use ashlar masonry, with blocks carved to fit together so precisely that mortar was unnecessary. These blocks have slightly cushioned surfaces, bulging gently outward, which may serve both aesthetic and structural purposes. The slight cushioning creates shadows that emphasize each block while potentially allowing minute movement during earthquakes without causing structural failure. How the Incas achieved such precision without iron tools remains a subject of study. They worked with stone tools, primarily harder stones used to pound and grind softer ones. Bronze tools, available in limited quantities, could shape stone, but were too valuable for routine work. The process was time-intensive, requiring enormous patience and skill. Evidence suggests that stones were shaped gradually through patient abrasion rather than cutting. Workers would rough out the basic shape, test-fit the stone repeatedly, mark high spots, remove them, and test again, continuing until achieving perfect fit. For large blocks, this process could take weeks. The result was joints so tight that even modern tools cannot be inserted between blocks. Some blocks are truly massive. The largest stones at Machu Picchu weigh an estimated 50 metric tons or more. Moving these blocks from quarries to their final positions, up steep slopes and across difficult terrain, required sophisticated organizational and engineering capabilities. The Incas used wooden rollers, possibly lubricated tracks, ramps, and coordinated teams of hundreds of workers pulling with ropes. The quarrying process left its marks. Several unfinished stones remain at the granite outcrops above the city, showing various stages of the extraction process. Workers would identify natural fissures in the rock, then drive wooden wedges into these cracks. Wetting the wedges caused them to expand, gradually splitting the stone along natural fracture lines. Once freed from the bedrock, the stone could be shaped and moved. The city's layout follows the natural topography while imposing geometric order. The site divides into agricultural and urban sectors, separated by a wall and moat. Within the urban sector, distinct areas served different functions: a religious precinct, royal residences, residential areas for priests and servants, and workshops. Building placement demonstrates astronomical knowledge. The Temple of the Sun is positioned so that during the June solstice, the southern winter solstice, sunlight enters through a trapezoid window and illuminates a ceremonial stone carved from the bedrock. The Intihuatana, a carved granite outcrop serving as a solar observatory, is positioned to cast specific shadows during solstices and equinoxes, functioning as a calendar for agricultural and ceremonial purposes. The entire site demonstrates an integration of practical and spiritual considerations. Water flows are not simply functional, but ceremonial, with fountains positioned in ritual sequence. Sightlines from key structures align with sacred peaks. The positioning of buildings creates a cosmogram, a physical representation of Andean understanding of the universe's structure. What makes all this more remarkable is that it was achieved without several technologies often considered essential for monumental architecture. The Incas had no wheeled vehicles for transport. They had no draft animals apart from llamas, which can carry only modest loads. They had no pulleys or cranes for lifting. They had no iron tools. They had no written mathematical notation for calculating angles or loads, relying instead on knotted strings called quipus that recorded numerical information and possibly narrative content in ways not fully understood. Yet they created a city that has endured for more than 550 years in one of Earth's most challenging environments. This achievement testifies to accumulated knowledge passed from generation to generation. Sophisticated understanding of materials and structures developed through trial and error over centuries, and an organizational capacity capable of mobilizing and coordinating thousands of laborers on multi-year projects. Understanding what Machu Picchu was requires moving beyond modern categories of city or fortress to recognize it as a uniquely Andean institution. In Quechua, it would have been called Alacta, a term encompassing settlement, agricultural land, and the community inhabiting them as an integrated whole. More specifically, Machu Picchu appears to have been a royal estate, similar to other sites built by Inca rulers as personal retreats and sources of wealth. When a new Sapa Inca ascended to power, he did not inherit his predecessor's property. Instead, the deceased emperor's mummy retained ownership of his estates, which continued to generate resources supporting his cult and descendants. The new emperor had to create his own wealth through conquest and construction. This system incentivized each Sapa Inca to expand the empire and build new estates. Pachacútec, having secured his position through military victory rather than straightforward succession, would have been particularly motivated to create monuments demonstrating his legitimacy and power. Machu Picchu served this purpose magnificently. The site's population was probably never large. Archaeological evidence suggests perhaps 500 to 750 permanent residents during the site's active occupation, with capacity to accommodate more during ceremonial events when Pachacútec and his court were in residence. This population breaks down into several distinct groups based on their roles and status. At the apex were the Inca nobility, including Pachacútec himself when present, along with high priests and administrators. These individuals occupied the finest residences in the royal sector, structures featuring the highest quality stonework, private access to water, and strategic positioning with views of sacred peaks. Below the nobility were specialized craftspeople, stonemasons who maintained and expanded the site, weavers producing fine textiles, metalworkers creating ceremonial objects, and potters. The discovery of numerous grinding stones, weaving tools, and workshop areas indicates significant craft production, likely creating goods for use in ceremonies or as gifts, reinforcing social bonds with other nobles. A larger group consisted of yanakuna, retainers who had left their home communities to serve the emperor directly. These individuals staffed the royal household, prepared food, maintained buildings and terraces, and performed other support functions. Unlike Mita laborers who served temporarily, yanakuna held permanent positions, often passed from parent to child. The agricultural population worked the terraces and maintained the irrigation system. Analysis of terrace soil and pollen indicates cultivation of maize, potatoes, quinoa, and other Andean staples. The terraces could produce significant harvests, though probably not enough to completely feed the population. Additional food would have arrived via the Inca road system from lower elevation agricultural areas in the Sacred Valley. Religious specialists formed another important group. Machu Picchu's primary function may have been ceremonial, serving as a site where Pachacútec performed rituals honoring Inti, making offerings to mountain spirits and conducting astronomical observations to maintain the calendar. Priests and priestesses would have conducted daily ceremonies, maintained temples, and prepared offerings. Archaeological evidence of daily life comes from numerous sources. Ceramic assemblages show both locally produced utilitarian wares and fine Cusco polychrome ceramics imported for elite use. The presence of arrebalo jars, distinctive tall vessels with pointed bases and flaring rims, indicates storage and serving of chicha, the fermented maize beer that was ceremonially and nutritionally important. Stone tools, despite the fame of Machu Picchu's ashlar architecture, remained common for everyday tasks. Excavations have recovered thousands of stone tools, including scrapers, knives, and hammerstones. Bronze tools appear less frequently, reflecting their value and probably restricted use for specialized tasks. Analysis shows a population drawn from throughout the empire, not just the Cusco region. This supports the interpretation of Machu Picchu as a royal estate staffed by retainers from diverse backgrounds rather than a traditional community. The diet, reconstructed from bone chemistry and botanical remains, was diverse. Maize formed a staple, supplemented by potatoes, quinoa, legumes, and other crops grown on the terraces. Meat came from llamas and guinea pigs, with the former also providing wool and transport. The forest provided supplementary foods, including fruits, nuts, and edible plants. The river contributed fish, though in limited quantities given the difficulty of accessing the water thousands of meters below the city. The daily rhythm would have been structured by agricultural and ceremonial calendars. The agricultural year in the Andes runs opposite to the Northern Hemisphere, with planting during the rainy season from October through March and harvest during the dry season from April through September. Major ceremonies marked solstices, equinoxes, planting, and harvest, with smaller rituals conducted daily to honor the sun, mountains, and other sacred forces. Life at Machu Picchu would have been physically demanding. The terraces required constant maintenance. Irrigation channels needed clearing. Structures required periodic repair. The altitude, while not extreme, still affects those unaccustomed to it, and the steep terrain made every movement effortful. Yet the site's beauty, its spiritual significance, and the prestige of serving in the emperor's household would have made these hardships acceptable or even desirable. On November 16, 1532, in the highland city of Cajamarca, approximately 168 Spanish conquistadors, led by Francisco Pizarro, captured the Sapa Inca Atahualpa, who was meeting them with a retinue of thousands, but without adequate military preparation for the Spanish surprise attack. This single event catalyzed the collapse of the Tahuantinsuyo, an empire of 12 million people controlled through a centralized administrative system that depended on the Sapa Inca's authority. Atahualpa, held captive, offered a ransom. A room approximately 6.7 meters by 5.2 meters filled with gold objects to a height he could reach, along with 2 similar rooms filled with silver. Over months, as word spread through the empire, gold and silver artifacts poured into Cajamarca from throughout the Tahuantinsuyo. Much of this treasure was melted down, destroying thousands of years of artistic heritage to create bars for easier transport to Spain. Despite paying the ransom, Atahualpa was executed in July 1533. Pizarro then marched on Cusco, arriving in November 1533. The city was taken with relatively little fighting, as civil war had already weakened Inca military capacity. Atahualpa had himself recently defeated his half-brother Huáscar in a succession struggle, and many of Huáscar's supporters initially saw the Spanish as potential allies against Atahualpa's faction. The speed of the conquest was stunning. An empire that had taken a century to build collapsed in less than 2 years. The Spanish immediately began imposing their own order, Christianity replacing Inti worship, Spanish law supplanting Inca administration, and encomienda grants distributing indigenous labor to Spanish conquistadors. Spanish chroniclers documented this conquest obsessively. Men like Pedro de Chiesa de León, Juan de Betanzos, and later Garcilaso de la Vega wrote detailed accounts of the Inca Empire, describing cities, temples, roads, customs, and the conquest itself. These chronicles provide invaluable information about Inca civilization, preserving details that would otherwise have been lost as the old order collapsed. Yet in all these chronicles, in all the detailed descriptions of Inca architecture, ceremonial centers, and administrative infrastructure, Machu Picchu is never mentioned by name. This silence is one of the great puzzles of Andean history. How could a site of such architectural magnificence, built by the empire's greatest ruler, simply disappear from the historical record? Several factors contributed to this silence, each revealing something important about both the site and the nature of the Spanish conquest. First, Machu Picchu was abandoned before or very shortly after the Spanish arrival. Archaeological evidence, including radiocarbon dating and ceramic analysis, indicates that the site's occupation ceased around 1540 to 1550, within a decade or two of the conquest's beginning. When Spanish chroniclers were documenting Inca sites in the 1540s and 1550s, Machu Picchu may have already been deserted and beginning to be reclaimed by the jungle. The reasons for abandonment are debated, but likely involved multiple factors. The Mita labor system that sustained the site collapsed with the empire. Specialized craftspeople and retainers who staffed the royal estates scattered or died from European diseases that devastated indigenous populations. Without the Sapa Inca's presence and the ceremonies that justified the site's existence, Machu Picchu lost its purpose. More significantly, with Pachacútec's mummy removed from the site or destroyed, and his descendants losing their privileged position in the new Spanish order, there was no one with both the authority and resources to maintain the estate. In the Inca system, royal estates were personal property of individual emperors. Pachacútec's line would have owned Machu Picchu. But in the chaos of conquest and the restructuring of society, such ownership became meaningless. Second, the site's geography protected it from Spanish attention. Located approximately 75 kilometers from Cusco as the condor flies, but much farther by any actual route, Machu Picchu was not on the way to anywhere that interested the conquistadors. The Spanish focused on areas with extractable wealth, gold and silver mines, agricultural valleys capable of supporting encomiendas, and cities where they could establish administrative control. The Urubamba Gorge, while impressive, offered little of interest to the Spanish. The terrain was too steep for European-style agriculture. There were no obvious mineral deposits. The population was sparse. Spanish attention focused on the sacred valley below Machu Picchu, where better agricultural land and established indigenous communities made colonization more practical. Third, the Spanish showed limited interest in sites that lacked gold or obvious economic value. While they documented major temples like the Coricancha because these held precious metals, smaller ceremonial sites attracted less attention. If Machu Picchu had already been stripped of any precious metal objects before Spanish arrival, either looted or removed by Inca authorities, hiding treasures from the conquistadors, there would be even less reason for Spanish interest. Fourth, the nature of Spanish documentation created blind spots. Chroniclers relied heavily on information from Inca informants, typically nobles from Cusco who had survived the conquest. These informants had their own reasons for revealing or concealing information. Sites associated with particular royal lineages might be deliberately omitted to protect them from Spanish exploitation or desecration. Some scholars speculate that Machu Picchu's location and purpose were deliberately kept secret. If it had been a sacred site restricted to the emperor and high nobility during Inca times, knowledge of it would have been limited even within Inca society. After the conquest, those who knew of it might have chosen silence to protect it from Spanish looting and destruction. Archaeological evidence of abandonment supports this interpretation. Unlike many Inca sites that show evidence of Spanish looting, structural modification, or reuse, Machu Picchu appears to have been peacefully abandoned and then forgotten. Buildings were not destroyed. There are no signs of burning or violence. Objects of value were apparently removed, but structures were left intact. This suggests a deliberate, organized abandonment rather than flight or catastrophe. The Inca resistance movement provides additional context. After the Spanish took Cusco, Manco Inca, who had initially collaborated with the Spanish, rebelled in 1536. He withdrew to Vilcabamba, in the jungle northwest of Machu Picchu, where he established a neo-Inca state that survived until 1572. This resistance state, while eventually defeated, occupied Spanish military attention and resources for nearly 4 decades. During this period, the Spanish were primarily concerned with Vilcabamba itself, the center of resistance, and paid little attention to archaeological sites in the surrounding mountains. Machu Picchu, located between Cusco and Vilcabamba, but not directly on the invasion route to the resistance capital, would have been strategically irrelevant to Spanish military concerns. The execution of Tupac Amaru I in 1572 marked the end of Inca independence. The Spanish had finally captured Vilcabamba, killing or capturing the last Inca nobles. With organized resistance ended, Spanish attention turned to consolidating control, converting indigenous peoples to Christianity and extracting wealth through mining and agriculture. Archaeological exploration was not a priority, yet the site was not entirely forgotten. Colonial documents from the 16th and 17th centuries occasionally mention places named Pichu or Huayna Picchu in the region. In 1568, just 36 years after the conquest, a document mentions that land including Huayna Picchu and Machu Picchu was granted to a Spanish conquistador. This suggests that while the city itself was abandoned and overgrown, the general area remained known to local inhabitants. Indeed, throughout the colonial period and into the Republican era, campesinos in the Urubamba Valley knew of ruins high in the mountains. They used the terraces for planting and sheltered in the buildings during storms. For them, these were simply old Inca structures, interesting but not particularly remarkable in a region full of pre-Columbian remains. What was lost was not local knowledge of the site's existence, but rather knowledge of its significance. The connection to Pachacútec, the understanding of its ceremonial importance, and the recognition of its extraordinary engineering were forgotten. Machu Picchu became simply that old place up the mountain, known to locals but invisible to the wider world. This state of affairs persisted for nearly 4 centuries. Maps of the region showed blank spaces. Travel accounts occasionally mentioned ruins, but provided no details. The scholarly world, increasingly interested in pre-Columbian civilizations during the 19th century, had no idea that one of the most spectacular archaeological sites in the Americas lay hidden in the clouds above the Urubamba River. The man who would bring Machu Picchu to world attention was Hiram Bingham III, born in 1875 in Honolulu to a family of Protestant missionaries. Bingham attended Yale University, earning a PhD in history, and joined the faculty in 1907 as a lecturer specializing in South American history. He was ambitious, charismatic, and driven by a romantic vision of exploration and discovery that characterized early 20th century American academia. In 1911, Bingham led a Yale Peruvian expedition with the stated goal of finding Vilcabamba, the lost capital of the Inca resistance state. The expedition was funded by Yale and by Bingham's wife's wealthy family. It included several scientists, a surgeon, and support personnel. The expedition had official permission from the Peruvian government, which hoped that scientific investigation might boost tourism and international interest in Peru's archaeological heritage. Bingham's route followed the Urubamba River Valley, which local tradition held contained ruins related to the last Incas. The expedition traveled by mule and on foot, camping in the open or in the homes of local campesinos who provided information about archaeological sites in the region. On July 23, 1911, the expedition was camped at Mandorpampa, near the bottom of the Urubamba Gorge. That evening, a local farmer named Melchor Arteaga mentioned that ruins existed high above the river, on the ridge between Huayna Picchu and Machu Picchu mountains. He offered to guide Bingham to the site for a payment of 1 Peruvian sol, about 50 cents. On July 24, 1911, Bingham, Arteaga, and a Peruvian sergeant who accompanied the expedition as a government representative began the climb. The ascent was difficult, following a steep, muddy trail through dense vegetation. At times, they crawled on hands and knees. After several hours of climbing, they reached the ridge. There, Living in rough shelters among the ruins were several campesino families, including the Alvarez and Rechat families. These families had been using the terraces for agriculture, taking advantage of the excellent soil and pre-existing retaining walls. Two young boys, Pablito Alvarez and his cousin, served as guides for the final approach to the ruins. As Bingham emerged from the forest into the Temple of the Sun area, he confronted architecture unlike anything he had seen. The massive stone blocks, fitted together with impossible precision. The trapezoidal windows and doorways, the integration of buildings with bedrock, all suggested a site of extraordinary importance. Bingham's diary entry for that day captures his immediate reaction. Surprise followed surprise, until there came the realization that we were in the midst of as wonderful ruins as any ever found in Peru. It seemed almost incredible that this city could have been lost for centuries. Over the following hours, Bingham explored the site, taking photographs and making notes. The vegetation was thick. Centuries of abandonment had allowed the jungle to reclaim much of the city, but the structures themselves, protected by the dry season and the site's relative isolation, remained remarkably intact. Bingham was convinced he had found Vilcabamba, the lost capital he had been seeking. This belief shaped his initial interpretation of the site. He theorized that Machu Picchu had been built as a refuge during the Spanish conquest, a hidden fortress where the last Incas had retreated. The site's defensive position, surrounded by cliffs and accessible only by narrow paths, seemed to support this interpretation. This theory was incorrect. Vilcabamba, later correctly identified as the ruins at Espiritu Pampa, lay further west in the jungle, and Machu Picchu's construction dated to the mid-15th century, decades before the conquest. But Bingham's error was understandable, given the limited archaeological knowledge available in 1911. Bingham returned to the site in 1912, leading a larger expedition funded by Yale and National Geographic. This expedition spent several months at Machu Picchu, clearing vegetation, excavating, mapping, and photographing. The work revealed the full extent of the site: more than 150 buildings, extensive terracing, sophisticated water systems, and extraordinary stonework. The expedition recovered thousands of artifacts, ceramics, stone tools, bronze objects, and more than 100 skeletal remains from burial sites. This material was shipped to Yale University with the understanding, according to Bingham and Yale, that it was a temporary loan for study. The Peruvian government later claimed the agreement called for the material's return, beginning a controversy that would last nearly a century. Bingham's photographs and descriptions appeared in National Geographic magazine in April 1913, in an entire issue devoted to Machu Picchu. The images were stunning: a lost city emerging from the clouds, stone buildings clinging to an impossible ridge, the dramatic peak of Huayna Picchu rising behind ancient temples. The article made Bingham famous and brought Machu Picchu to world attention. Bingham published several books about his discoveries, including Lost City of the Incas, 1948, which remained the authoritative English-language work on Machu Picchu for decades. His dramatic prose and adventurous narrative helped establish Machu Picchu as a symbol of mystery and lost civilizations in popular imagination. However, Bingham's role as discoverer deserves scrutiny. He was certainly not the first person to see Machu Picchu. Local families had been living among the ruins and farming the terraces. The Alvarez and Rechat families had been there for years. Other explorers and treasure hunters had visited the site before Bingham. What Bingham did was bring Machu Picchu to international scholarly and popular attention. documenting it systematically and publicizing it effectively. Moreover, the extraction of artifacts remains controversial. Between 1912 and 1916, Yale expeditions removed an estimated 46,000 artifacts from Machu Picchu and other sites. While this was done with Peruvian government permission, questions about the terms of that permission and obligations for return persisted. Peru formally requested the materials return, beginning in the 1920s. The dispute was finally resolved in 2007 when Peru filed a lawsuit in U.S. federal court. Yale agreed to return the artifacts, which were transferred in several shipments between 2011 and 2012. They are now housed in the Casa Concha Museum in Cusco, operated by the National University of San Marcos. The resolution came almost exactly 100 years after Bingham's first visit, allowing the materials to finally return home. Despite the controversy over artifacts, Bingham's role in revealing Machu Picchu to the world remains significant. His documentation provided the foundation for subsequent research. His photographs captured the site before modern tourism altered it, and his publications sparked scholarly and public interest that has sustained research for more than a century. Bingham himself had a varied career. He left archaeology after World War I, during which he served as an aviator. He entered politics, serving as Connecticut's governor and later as a U.S. senator. He lived until 1956, long enough to see Machu Picchu become one of the world's most famous archaeological sites. Whether he should be called its discoverer remains debated, but his role in making it known is undeniable. The century since Bingham's discovery has seen intensive archaeological investigation of Machu Picchu, progressively refining understanding of its construction, function, and place in Inca civilization. This research has employed increasingly sophisticated techniques, from traditional excavation to cutting-edge technologies like LIDAR scanning and isotopic analysis of skeletal remains. The work of establishing basic chronology and function fell to researchers in the mid-20th century. Luis E. Valcárcel, a pioneering Peruvian archaeologist, conducted excavations in the 1930s and 1940s, focusing on areas Bingham had not fully investigated. Valcárcel's work helped establish that Machu Picchu was not Vilcabamba, but rather a site from the empire's height, built under Pachacútec. Paul Fejos, a Hungarian-American anthropologist, conducted detailed mapping and excavation in 1940 to 1941. His work produced the first truly comprehensive site plan, showing the relationships between different architectural sectors and identifying previously unrecognized structures hidden by vegetation. Fejos's photographs and maps remain valuable research resources. In the 1980s and 1990s, major advances came from studying the artifacts Bingham had removed and from new excavations conducted by Peruvian archaeologists. Analysis of ceramic styles confirmed that Machu Picchu's primary occupation dated to approximately 1450 to 1540 CE, the height of Inca imperial expansion under Pachacútec and his immediate successors. Skeletal analysis provided insights into the site's population. Studies by bioarchaeologist John Verano and others examined the more than 100 sets of skeletal remains recovered by Bingham. Initial analysis suggested a high proportion of females, leading to speculation that Machu Picchu was a sanctuary for Aklakuna, chosen women who served religious functions. However, more careful reanalysis using modern techniques showed a more balanced sex ratio, contradicting this theory. Isotopic analysis of bone chemistry revealed that the population came from diverse regions, not just the Cusco area. This supports the interpretation that Machu Picchu was staffed by retainers and specialists drawn from throughout the empire, reflecting its status as a royal estate rather than a typical community. The skeletal remains also showed relatively good health and nutrition, little evidence of warfare trauma, and signs of individuals engaged in hard, physical labor. This portrait suggests a working population that, while laboring under demanding conditions, was adequately fed and not subject to violence. More recent work has focused on understanding Machu Picchu's sacred landscape and astronomical alignments. Anthropologist Johann Reinhard conducted extensive research in the 1990s and 2000s, documenting how the site's architecture aligns with surrounding peaks and with solar events. Reinhard demonstrated that Machu Picchu was not simply built in a dramatic location, but was positioned to create specific relationships with sacred mountains visible from the site. The Intihuatana, the carved stone serving as an astronomical observatory, has been particularly studied. During the September and March equinoxes, when the sun passes directly overhead at this latitude, the Intihuatana casts no shadow at noon. At the June solstice, southern winter, shadows cast by the stone reach their maximum length. At the December solstice, southern summer, shadows are shortest. These observations would have been religiously significant and practically useful for maintaining the agricultural calendar. The Temple of the Sun's window alignment has also been precisely documented. During the June solstice, the rising sun shines directly through the temple's main window, illuminating the stone altar inside. This alignment was not accidental, but carefully planned, requiring precise understanding of solar movements and sophisticated surveying to achieve. Engineering studies have examined the site's remarkable preservation. Analysis of the terrace systems, drainage networks, and foundations explains how structures have survived more than 5 centuries of earthquakes and tropical rainfall. The engineering principles revealed at Machu Picchu, particularly the drainage infrastructure, have influenced modern construction in seismically active regions. Conservation efforts have intensified as tourism has grown. The site received approximately 500,000 visitors in 1990. By 2019, that number had grown to approximately 1.5 million annually. This volume of tourism, while providing economic benefits to Peru and local communities, also threatens the site's preservation. Foot traffic erodes terraces and trails. Humidity from crowds affects interior structures. The infrastructure needed to support tourism, roads, hotels, restaurants, creates environmental pressures. In 1983, UNESCO designated Machu Picchu a World Heritage Site, recognizing its outstanding universal value. This designation brings international attention to conservation needs, but also increases tourism pressure. Balancing preservation and access remains an ongoing challenge. Peru has implemented visitor limits, restricted access to certain areas, and required all visitors to enter with licensed guides, but debates continue about whether these measures are sufficient. Recent archaeological work has explored areas beyond the main urban core. In 2003, a team discovered a previously unknown sector called the Intimache, or Cave of the Sun, a cave with precisely carved windows that capture sunlight during the December solstice. This discovery demonstrated that significant features remain to be documented even after a century of research. Another exciting development has been the use of LiDAR, light detection and ranging technology, which uses laser pulses to create detailed three-dimensional maps of the ground surface even beneath forest canopy. LiDAR surveys of the area around Machu Picchu have revealed previously unknown terraces, structures, and roads, suggesting that the known site represents only part of a larger complex. In 2021, Researchers using LiDAR and satellite imagery announced evidence of agricultural terracing extending far beyond the previously mapped area, possibly indicating that Machu Picchu's agricultural capacity was significantly greater than previously estimated. This finding may require revision of theories about the site's population and self-sufficiency. Modern interpretation increasingly emphasizes Machu Picchu as part of a larger sacred landscape rather than an isolated site. The city cannot be understood separately from the surrounding peaks, the Urubamba River below, the Inca Road connecting it to Cusco and other sites, and the agricultural terraces extending into the surrounding valleys. This holistic approach better reflects Andean cosmovision, which did not separate human settlements from their natural and sacred contexts. To understand Machu Picchu's true significance requires moving beyond purely architectural or engineering analysis to recognize its role as a sacred space embedded in a living landscape. For the Incas, mountains were not merely geographical features, but powerful spiritual beings, apus, that required respect and offerings. The landscape itself was sacred, and human constructions should harmonize with rather than dominate it. The placement of Machu Picchu demonstrates this worldview. The site sits surrounded by prominent peaks, each recognized as a powerful apu. To the south rises Salcantay at 6,271 meters, one of the highest peaks in the region, perpetually snow-covered and visible from Machu Picchu on clear days. To the northeast stands Veronica, 5,893 meters, another glacier-clad peak. These mountains were not backdrop, but active presences, spiritual forces that shaped the sacred geography. The Urubamba River, called Wilcamayu, Sacred River, in Quechua, was itself a deity. Its waters, flowing from glaciers high in the Andes toward the Amazon basin, represented the life-giving power of water in a landscape where agriculture depended on irrigation. The river's loop around Machu Picchu mountain created a natural moat, but more importantly, it symbolically enclosed the site in the river deity's embrace. The peaks immediately adjacent to the city, Huayna Picchu and Machu Picchu Mountain, were also sacred. Climbing Huayna Picchu today, following the steep trail carved by the Incas, reveals structures at the summit, including carved platforms that may have served as observation points or ritual spaces. The effort required to build even simple structures on this near-vertical peak testifies to its spiritual importance. The Intihuatana, whose name translates as hitching post of the sun, represents the most sophisticated integration of architecture, astronomy, and religion at the site. This carved outcrop of bedrock, shaped into complex angular surfaces, serves multiple astronomical functions. At the equinoxes, the sun passes directly overhead at local noon, and the Intihuatana's carefully shaped surfaces cast no shadow. At solstices, the shadows align with specific architectural features. But the Intihuatana was not merely an observational tool. It was a sacred object, a point where human ritual could influence cosmic forces. The Incas believed that maintaining proper ritual relationships with celestial bodies, particularly the sun, was necessary for cosmic order. Ceremonies at the Intihuatana during key dates reinforced these relationships, binding the sun to ensure its continued movement and the maintenance of seasonal cycles. Nearly all Intihuatana stones throughout the Inca Empire were deliberately destroyed during the Spanish conquest. Spanish authorities recognized these stones as important religious objects and sought to eliminate them as part of the campaign to impose Christianity. The survival of Machu Picchu's Intihuatana, intact and unbroken after more than 5 centuries, makes it extraordinarily rare and significant. The Temple of the Sun demonstrates another aspect of astronomical architecture. This semicircular structure, built around a massive natural rock outcrop, features two windows positioned to frame the June solstice sunrise. During this event, the Southern Hemisphere's winter solstice and the Inca celebration of Inti Raymi, the sun's first rays enter the temple and illuminate the altar stone. This alignment was not accidental. Creating it required observing the sun's position over an annual cycle, determining the precise sunrise point on the solstice, and designing the temple to frame that event. The sophistication of the astronomy and engineering involved demonstrates that Inca knowledge of celestial movements was extensive and accurate. The temple's interior features precisely carved niches that may have held religious objects or mummies. The floor is carved from bedrock, with a channel cut into the stone that may have carried ritual offerings or libations. Below the temple is a cave, also worked into elaborate form, that may have served additional ceremonial functions. The entire complex represents an integration of natural features, the rock outcrop and cave, with human-built structures to create a sacred space. Water played a crucial sacred role throughout the site. The 16 fountains stepping down the city's eastern flank were not merely utilitarian, but ceremonial. Water flowing from the spring represented the movement of life force through the community, connecting mountain sources with human habitation. Each fountain was carved from a single block of stone with elaborate precision, demonstrating that functional infrastructure was also ritual architecture. The first fountain, receiving water directly from the channel connecting to the spring, served the Temple of the Sun and royal sector. Water flowing from this fountain to lower levels physically manifested the hierarchical order of Inca society, with the most sacred and highest status areas receiving water first, which then flowed down to serve others. The site's plaza and ceremonial spaces align with specific peaks. From the main plaza, Machu Picchu rises directly north, framing the northern sky where certain constellations important in Andean astronomy appear. To the east, the Temple of the Sun and Intihuatana are positioned where the sun rises during important dates. To the west, mountains block the horizon where the sun sets, creating a defined sacred boundary. This careful alignment demonstrates that Machu Picchu was designed as a cosmogram, a physical representation of the Inca understanding of the universe's structure. The site mediates between the human and divine worlds, providing a space where ceremonies could maintain the proper relationships between them. Andean cosmology divided the universe into three realms: the Hanan Pacha, upper world, associated with celestial deities and ancestors; the K Pacha, middle world, where humans live; and the Uku Pacha, inner world, associated with the earth, fertility, and death. These were not separate dimensions, but interpenetrating aspects of a unified reality. Machu Picchu's architecture moves between these realms. Towers and elevated temples reach toward the Hanan Pacha, allowing ritual connection with celestial forces. Caves and subterranean chambers descend toward the Uku Pacha, connecting with earth forces. And the plazas and residential areas occupy the K Pacha, where humans conduct their lives. The stairways that connect different levels of the site are not merely functional, but symbolic, representing passages between these cosmic realms. Ascending stairs leads toward the celestial. Descending leads toward the earthly and subterranean. Movement through the site was therefore movement through a sacred geography that mirrored cosmic structure. This understanding makes clear that Machu Picchu cannot be understood as simply a building project, however impressive its engineering. It was a sacred undertaking, creating a space where the boundaries between human and divine, between earth and sky, between past and present, became permeable. Living and working there meant existing at the threshold between worlds, participating in maintaining cosmic order through daily labor and periodic ceremony. The decline and abandonment of Machu Picchu remains less thoroughly documented than its construction, but the broad outline is clear. The site was occupied for approximately 80 to 100 years, from around 1450 to sometime between 1530 and 1550. Its abandonment coincided with the Spanish conquest's devastating effects on Inca society, though the mechanisms were complex. The immediate cause was the collapse of the systems that sustained the site. Machu Picchu, as a royal estate, depended on resources funneled through the Mita labor system and on supplies transported via the Inca road network. Both systems broke down rapidly after 1532. Disease, warfare, and social disruption ended the organized labor mobilization that maintained the site's terraces, buildings, and water systems. Epidemic disease played a catastrophic role. Smallpox, introduced by European contact, swept through indigenous populations beginning even before Spanish conquistadors reached Peru. Some estimates suggest that disease killed 50 to 90% of indigenous Americans in the century following European contact. Machu Picchu's population, concentrated in a small area with regular contact with travelers from throughout the empire, would have been particularly vulnerable. The site's specialized population also made it vulnerable. Unlike agricultural communities that could potentially maintain themselves independently, Machu Picchu depended on a complex support network. Craft specialists, priests, and nobility could not simply shift to subsistence farming. As the systems supporting them collapsed, the population dispersed or died. The absence of the Sapa Inca removed the site's primary purpose. Machu Picchu was built for Pachacútec to serve his needs for sacred space and demonstrate his power. With the imperial system destroyed and Pachacútec's mummy removed from power, Spanish authorities destroyed royal mummies to eliminate their political influence. There was no reason to maintain the estate. The site shows no evidence of violent destruction. Unlike many Inca sites that were looted, burned, or deliberately destroyed by Spanish forces, Machu Picchu's structures remain intact. This suggests peaceful abandonment rather than catastrophic end. People left, probably gradually over several years, taking portable objects of value but leaving the architecture intact. Environmental factors contributed to the site's gradual concealment. The cloud forest vegetation that the Incas had carefully managed to keep, cleared from plazas and buildings, began reclaiming spaces. Without constant human activity, keeping paths clear and walls visible, moss, lichens, and eventually larger plants colonized the stonework. Trees grew in plazas. Vines covered walls. The process was gradual but inexorable. Within decades, structures were partially hidden. Within a century, the forest had largely reclaimed the site. From the Urubamba Valley below, Machu Picchu became invisible, just another green ridge among many. The terraces, being open spaces with thin soil, were more resistant to forest encroachment and remained usable for agriculture, which is why local families continued using them even as the urban core disappeared under vegetation. Yet the site was never entirely forgotten locally. Campesino families in the Urubamba Valley maintained oral traditions about old Inca places high in the mountains. Some families, like the Alvarez and Richart families Bingham encountered, lived among the ruins and farmed the terraces. For them, these were simply old structures, part of the landscape like the mountains and rivers. Colonial documents occasionally reference the area. A document from 1568 mentions that land, including Huayna Picchu and Machu Picchu, was granted to Spaniard Juan de Betanzos. Whether this refers specifically to the archaeological site is debated, but it demonstrates that the place names persisted in official records even as knowledge of the site's significance disappeared. In 1874, the German businessman Augusto Burns obtained permission to exploit treasures on the mountains of Huayna Picchu or Machu Picchu. Whether Burns actually visited the site or conducted excavations is unknown, but the document confirms that people in Cusco were aware of ruins in that location 37 years before Bingham's arrival. Local guides and muleteer knew of various Inca ruins throughout the region. Knowledge of Machu Picchu existed as part of this broader awareness of pre-Columbian sites, not as recognition of a particularly significant location. The site's importance had been forgotten, even as its existence remained vaguely known. This state of forgotten but not lost persisted because several factors converged. The site's remoteness protected it from casual visitors. The lack of obvious treasure protected it from systematic looting. The Spanish colonial administration's disinterest in archaeological sites meant no official documentation, and the site's abandonment before intensive Spanish presence in the region meant it never entered colonial consciousness as a significant place. What's remarkable is not that Machu Picchu was forgotten, but that it survived relatively intact through 4 centuries of neglect. The engineering that made it possible to build in such a challenging location, the drainage systems and foundations, also ensured its survival. Water continued to drain properly even without maintenance. Terraces held despite erosion. Buildings remained structurally sound despite earthquakes. The dry season climate also contributed to preservation. While the rainy season brings heavy precipitation, the dry season from May through September is relatively arid. This annual drying prevented the constant moisture that would promote stone decay and allowed structures to stabilize between wet periods. When Bingham arrived in 1911, he found a site that was overgrown but structurally sound. Clearing vegetation revealed intact buildings, undamaged stonework, and a site plan that could be mapped and understood. Had another century passed before rediscovery, accelerating deterioration might have damaged structures beyond easy reconstruction of their original form. The rediscovery, while often described romantically as the revelation of a lost city, was actually the rediscovery of its significance rather than its existence. Bingham didn't find a place unknown to all humans, but rather a place whose importance had been forgotten by the scholarly and wider world. Local people knew it existed. What Bingham did was recognize its significance and communicate that to an international audience. Today, Machu Picchu is Peru's most visited attraction and one of the world's most iconic archaeological sites. It was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1983, recognized as an outstanding example of man's harmonization with his environment. In 2007, it was named one of the new 7 wonders of the world in a global poll. These recognitions reflect both the site's extraordinary significance and the challenges of preserving it. The growth in tourism has been exponential. In 1980, approximately 150,000 people visited annually. By 2000, that number reached 400,000. By 2019, it exceeded 1.5 million, making it one of the most visited archaeological sites globally. The COVID-19 pandemic temporarily reduced numbers in 2020 to 2021, but tourism quickly rebounded. This volume of visitors creates immense economic benefits. Tourism related to Machu Picchu generates billions of dollars annually for Peru's economy. The town of Aguascalientes, at the base of the mountain, has transformed from a small railway stop into a tourist hub with dozens of hotels, restaurants, and services. Thousands of Peruvians work in tourism-related sectors, from guides to hotel workers to artisans selling crafts. However, this tourism also threatens the site's preservation. Foot traffic erodes trails and terraces. Humidity from crowds affects stone surfaces and accelerates organic growth. The infrastructure required to support tourism, access roads, hotels, sewage systems, impacts the surrounding environment. Helicopter tours proposed at various times would introduce noise and vibration, potentially damaging structures. The Peruvian government has implemented various measures to balance preservation and access. Daily visitor limits, currently set at approximately 5,500 people per day in staggered entry times, aim to reduce crowding. All visitors must enter with licensed guides who follow designated routes, preventing people from wandering freely and potentially damaging sensitive areas. Certain structures, including climbing on walls or entering some buildings, are prohibited. Despite these measures, conservation concerns persist. In 2016, UNESCO threatened to place Machu Picchu on its list of World Heritage in danger due to concerns about tourism impacts, urban development in Aguascalientes, and landslide risks. Peru responded with enhanced conservation measures, and the site avoided the endangered listing. But the episode highlighted ongoing vulnerabilities. Conservation work is continuous. Stone surfaces require monitoring and treatment to control biological growth. Drainage systems need periodic cleaning to maintain function. Structures damaged by earthquakes or weathering require stabilization using techniques that respect the original construction methods. All this work must balance preservation with visitor access. The site also faces natural threats. The region is seismically active, with significant earthquakes occurring every few decades. A major earthquake in 2004, measuring magnitude 6.5, caused minor damage to some structures and highlighted the ongoing seismic risk. Climate change may be intensifying rainfall patterns, potentially stressing drainage systems designed for historical precipitation levels. Landslide risk is particularly concerning. The site perches on a ridge with steep slopes on all sides. The geological surveys have identified areas of instability, and monitoring systems track ground movement. A catastrophic landslide could damage or destroy portions of the site. Climate change-induced glacier melting in the surrounding mountains could alter water flows and increase instability. Beyond physical preservation, questions arise about cultural preservation and meaning. What does Machu Picchu mean in the 21st century? For Peruvians, particularly those of indigenous heritage, it represents a connection to pre-colonial greatness, a symbol of indigenous achievement that resists colonial narratives of indigenous inferiority. The Quechua and other indigenous communities of the region have claimed cultural ownership of the site, sometimes in tension with government management. For tourists, meanings vary. Some seek spiritual experiences, finding in Machu Picchu's dramatic setting and ancient stones a connection to something transcendent. Others pursue bucket list tourism, fulfilling a desire to see a famous place. Still others engage seriously with the history and archaeology, seeking to understand Inca civilization. These different motivations create different relationships with the site and different impacts on it. The commercialization of Machu Picchu raises ethical questions. Should visiting such a significant site be available to anyone who can afford it, or should access be more restricted to better preserve it? How should the economic benefits of tourism be distributed between private companies, government agencies, and local communities? Who has the right to define what Machu Picchu means and how it should be presented? Indigenous rights movements have raised these questions forcefully. Some Quechua activists argue that Machu Picchu should be under indigenous management rather than government control, and that indigenous cosmovision should shape how the site is interpreted and presented. Others argue for greater economic benefits flowing to indigenous communities whose ancestors built the site. The tension between preservation and access has no perfect solution. Completely closing the site would preserve it most effectively, but would eliminate its role as a source of knowledge, inspiration, and economic benefit. Unlimited access would likely destroy what makes the site significant. The current approach attempts to balance these imperatives, but the balance remains contested and must be continually renegotiated as conditions change. Academic research continues to reveal new dimensions of the site. In recent years, studies have examined the astronomical alignments in greater detail, documented previously unknown structures in the surrounding area, and analyzed artifacts using new techniques that reveal information about trade networks, diet, and the geographic origins of the population. One particularly exciting area of research involves examining Machu Picchu in the context of other Inca royal estates. Sites like Pisac, Ollantaytambo, and Chinchero show similar architectural features and suggest that a network of such estates existed in the Sacred Valley and surrounding regions. Understanding these sites together provides richer insight into Inca royal life and the role of sacred landscape in Inca statecraft. Another research direction examines the Inca road system connecting Machu Picchu to the wider empire. The Inca Trail, now one of the world's most famous hiking routes, was originally part of the road network linking Machu Picchu to Cusco and other sites. Research has documented numerous structures along this route, including way stations, religious shrines, and administrative centers, revealing that Machu Picchu was never isolated but was integrated into imperial infrastructure. The challenge of presenting Machu Picchu to visitors in ways that convey its significance while managing impacts remains ongoing. Interpretive materials, museum displays, and guided tours attempt to communicate the site's history, engineering, and cultural importance. However, the sheer volume of visitors makes in-depth interpretation difficult. Many visitors spend only a few hours at the site, insufficient time for deep engagement with its complexities. Digital technologies offer some solutions. Virtual reality reconstructions allow people to experience the site without physical presence. Online resources provide detailed information accessible to anyone with internet access. These technologies can partially satisfy curiosity and might reduce pressure for physical visits. However, they also risk commodifying the site, reducing it to digital images detached from the landscape and sacred geography that give it meaning. The COVID-19 pandemic forced temporary closure of Machu Picchu, offering an accidental experiment in what happens when tourism pressure is removed. Vegetation grew more vigorously. Wildlife moved through the site more freely. The site rested in ways it hadn't since tourism development began. This period demonstrated both the resilience of the structures and the impact of constant human presence. As tourism has resumed, questions have been raised about whether the pre-pandemic model should be restored or whether the closure offered an opportunity to reimagine a more sustainable relationship with the site. These discussions continue, with various stakeholders proposing different visions, ranging from increased access to further restrictions. Placing Machu Picchu in global context requires comparison with other major archaeological sites and consideration of what makes it distinctive. The world contains thousands of significant archaeological sites, but only a handful achieve the global recognition that Machu Picchu enjoys. What accounts for its particular resonance? Part of the answer lies in its visual drama. The site's setting, perched on a ridge between mountain peaks with the Urubamba River far below, creates a spectacular image. Photographs of Machu Picchu, particularly those taken at sunrise with morning mist swirling around the ruins, are instantly recognizable worldwide. This photogenic quality has made the site a symbol not just of Peru, but of ancient achievement generally. The architecture itself contributes to this appeal. The precision of Inca stonework, with massive blocks fitted together without mortar so tightly that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them, impresses viewers and seems almost impossible without modern technology. This "how did they do it?" question generates fascination and speculation, some responsible and some wildly inaccurate. Comparison with other major sites reveals both commonalities and distinctions. Like the pyramids of Giza, Machu Picchu demonstrates sophisticated engineering adapted to challenging conditions. Like Angkor Wat, it integrates architecture with cosmology, creating built space that represents religious understanding. Like Petra, it occupies a dramatic landscape that enhances its visual impact. But Machu Picchu also differs in significant ways. Unlike the pyramids or Angkor Wat, it was not a major urban center or capital, but rather a specialized site serving royal and ceremonial functions. Unlike Petra, it was not built by a culture known primarily through classical Mediterranean sources, but by a civilization that until recently was understood mainly through colonial Spanish chronicles written by conquerors. The absence of writing at Machu Picchu, or more precisely, the absence of a phonetic writing system, makes it distinctive. The Inca used quipus, knotted strings that recorded numerical and possibly narrative information, but these have not been fully deciphered. Our understanding of the site therefore depends heavily on archaeology, ethnohistory, and comparison with what Spanish chroniclers recorded about Inca culture generally. This absence of indigenous written records creates both challenges and opportunities. The challenge is that we lack the internal perspective that hieroglyphic or cuneiform texts provide for understanding Egyptian or Mesopotamian sites. We cannot read what the Incas themselves said about Machu Picchu. The opportunity is that interpretation remains more open, less constrained by authoritative texts, allowing indigenous communities to reclaim meaning and offering space for multiple perspectives. The site's rediscovery narrative also contributes to its appeal. The story of Hiram Bingham hacking through jungle to reveal a lost city, while historically problematic in various ways, provides a compelling narrative that feeds popular imagination. The reality that Machu Picchu was never truly lost, but was known to local people complicates but doesn't entirely dispel this narrative's power. The designation as a new Seven Wonder of the World in 2007, while criticized by some archaeologists and historians as a publicity stunt lacking scholarly rigor, undeniably raised Machu Picchu's global profile. The Wonder designation places it alongside the Great Wall of China, Petra, the Colosseum, and other iconic sites, suggesting equivalence in significance and appeal. However, this global fame creates tensions. International audiences often understand Machu Picchu primarily as a tourist destination or a symbol of ancient mystery, rather than as a site with ongoing cultural significance for indigenous communities. The commercialization that fame brings can conflict with preservation and with indigenous claims to cultural ownership. Machu Picchu also occupies a particular place in narratives about pre-Columbian American civilizations. For centuries, European and Euro-American scholars underestimated or dismissed indigenous American achievements, attributing monumental architecture to lost civilizations from the Old World or to now vanished ancient peoples, rather than to the ancestors of contemporary indigenous communities. Machu Picchu, with its sophisticated engineering and preserved architecture, provides irrefutable evidence of indigenous achievement. It cannot be explained away or attributed to outside influences. The site stands as testimony to what indigenous American civilizations accomplished, helping to correct historical narratives that marginalized or erased indigenous contributions. In this sense, Machu Picchu has political significance beyond its archaeological importance. It serves as a counter-narrative to colonial histories, a demonstration that complex, sophisticated civilizations flourished in the Americas long before European arrival. For indigenous rights movements, it represents proof of cultural sophistication that resists narratives of indigenous primitiveness or inferiority. The site also raises broader questions about heritage, ownership, and preservation. Who owns the past? Who has the right to interpret and present it? How should the economic benefits derived from heritage tourism be distributed? These questions have no simple answers, but are increasingly urgent as heritage sites face pressures from tourism, development, and climate change. Machu Picchu's global significance also brings responsibility. As one of humanity's most impressive archaeological achievements, its preservation matters not just to Peru or to indigenous communities, but to global cultural heritage. The international attention the site receives brings resources and expertise for conservation, but also brings pressures and competing interests that complicate management. More than 5 centuries after its construction, Machu Picchu continues to teach lessons about human achievement, cultural sophistication, and the relationship between people and landscape. These lessons resonate beyond archaeology or history, speaking to contemporary concerns about sustainability, preservation, and what it means to build in harmony with the environment. The first and perhaps most obvious lesson is about capability. The Incas built Machu Picchu without iron tools, without wheels, without draft animals beyond llamas, without written mathematical notation, and without the accumulated engineering knowledge that centuries of European construction had developed. Yet they created structures that have survived 500 years of earthquakes, torrential rains, and abandonment. This achievement demonstrates that technological sophistication is not the only path to enduring construction. The engineering itself offers lessons. The Inca approach to drainage, creating extensive subsurface systems that prevent water damage, represents sophisticated understanding of hydrology and geotechnical engineering. Modern engineers studying Machu Picchu have found principles applicable to contemporary construction in seismically active regions. The terracing system, which prevents erosion while creating agricultural land, demonstrates sustainable land use in steep terrain. The integration of architecture with landscape provides another lesson. Rather than imposing buildings on the terrain, the Incas worked with the mountain's natural features. Structures follow topographic contours. Sacred natural features like rock outcrops are incorporated into buildings rather than removed. The result is a built environment that feels like part of the landscape rather than something imposed upon it. This integration reflects a fundamentally different relationship with nature than characterized much European or Euro-American development. The Incas did not see themselves as separate from or superior to nature, but as part of a sacred natural order. Mountains were not obstacles to overcome, but powerful spiritual beings deserving respect. Water was not simply a resource to exploit, but a sacred element requiring reverence. Whether this relationship was entirely harmonious is debatable. The Incas dramatically modified the landscape through terracing, forest clearing, and construction. They mobilized enormous resources and labor to build sites like Machu Picchu. But they did so within a framework that recognized the landscape as sacred and alive, which created constraints on how far modification could go. For contemporary societies facing environmental crises, this offers a relevant perspective. It suggests that sustainable relationships with the environment require not just better technology, but different philosophical frameworks, recognizing that humans exist within natural systems rather than apart from them. The site also teaches about the fragility of civilizations. The Inca Empire, at its height, one of the world's most sophisticated states, collapsed with stunning rapidity when faced with Spanish conquest and epidemic disease. Machu Picchu, built to endure through careful engineering, was abandoned within a century of its construction. Power, wealth, and architectural achievement provided no protection against systemic collapse. This lesson has contemporary relevance. Our own civilization, despite its technological capabilities, remains vulnerable to environmental change, pandemic disease, and social instability. The ruins of Machu Picchu remind us that no civilization is permanent, that what seems enduring can vanish within generations. Yet the site also teaches about resilience. Despite abandonment, despite centuries of neglect, despite earthquakes and rain and vegetation, Machu Picchu survives. The stone endures. The engineering principles that made construction possible also ensured preservation. This suggests that building for endurance, creating with quality and care, can produce works that outlast their creators by centuries. The indigenous communities whose ancestors built Machu Picchu also demonstrate resilience. Despite conquest, disease, exploitation, and cultural suppression, Quechua-speaking peoples survive in Peru's highlands. They maintain cultural practices, languages, and connections to sacred landscapes that predate the Spanish conquest. Machu Picchu stands as a symbol of this continuity, physical evidence that indigenous civilizations were not destroyed but adapted and endured. The site raises questions about preservation and access that will only intensify. How do we balance the desire to share extraordinary places with the need to protect them? How do we ensure that heritage tourism benefits local communities rather than primarily enriching distant corporations? How do we maintain the sacred character of places like Machu Picchu while allowing visitors who may not share indigenous beliefs? These questions have no perfect answers. Every solution involves trade-offs, but Machu Picchu's current situation demonstrates both the possibilities and challenges. The site is more accessible than ever, allowing millions to experience its beauty and power. But that access threatens the very qualities that make it significant. Finding sustainable equilibrium requires ongoing negotiation and willingness to prioritize long-term preservation over short-term economic benefit. The site also teaches humility. For 4 centuries, the European and Euro-American world dismissed or underestimated indigenous American civilizations. Machu Picchu's rediscovery and subsequent recognition as a supreme architectural achievement required acknowledging that assumptions about indigenous primitiveness were wrong. Indigenous peoples had created civilizations as sophisticated as any in the Old World, adapted to their own environments and expressing their own cultural values. This lesson remains relevant. Contemporary global civilization still tends toward cultural arrogance, assuming that Western approaches to technology, governance, and development are universally superior. Machu Picchu stands as a reminder that different civilizations can achieve sophistication through different paths, and that indigenous knowledge systems have value that deserves respect, rather than dismissal. For visitors who climb the final approach and see the city spread before them, stone terraces rising toward temple towers with Huayna Picchu jutting skyward beyond, the experience can be profound. The setting is extraordinary. The architecture is impressive, but perhaps the deepest impact comes from recognizing what the site represents: human beings 5 centuries ago, working with simple tools and extraordinary vision, creating something that endures. That vision combined practical skill with spiritual understanding, engineering knowledge with astronomical observation, political power with religious devotion. It recognized that buildings exist not just in physical space, but in cosmological and social contexts. And it produced a city that, despite abandonment and rediscovery, despite tourism and preservation challenges, despite centuries of change, still conveys something of the civilization that built it. Machu Picchu is not simply ruins. It is a message carved in stone, placed on a mountaintop where it could endure. The message speaks of human capability, of civilizations that flourished, of relationships with landscapes that modern societies are still learning to understand. It reminds us that the past was not primitive, but sophisticated in ways we are still discovering. And it challenges us to consider what we are building today that will endure, what messages we are leaving for future generations, and whether we are creating with the care and vision that produced this city in the clouds. The stone endures, the terraces hold, the water still flows through channels carved 5 centuries ago. And every sunrise, when the first light touches the Intihuatana and the Temple of the Sun, Machu Picchu reawakens, still speaking to those willing to listen. Thanks for watching. If you like, don't forget to subscribe. See you in our next documentary.